which is being approved for many, many years is still seriously insufficient, scattered pieces of legislation, not give grounds for real, meaningful and effective fight against corruption. Institutional setup for the fight against corruption in Ukraine is even worse. We see that it is heavily fragmentized. I don't know if there is any country in the world which would have so many anti-corruption institutions as the US. But the results are almost not visible. And the third one, practical results in the fight against corruption, I mentioned already. And here, of course, I depend on you too. We would appreciate much more if there would be really some practical results in the fight against corruption. Ukraine is now in a very sensitive situation. In addition to the problems you have with one of your border countries, in addition to economic problems, you have to fight corruption, which is, according to some diplomats in this country, is being also considered the most important enemy of Ukraine. I will not say who is number one and who's number two, but for sure, without fighting corruption, this country will suffer serious consequences, which it already does now. If you're not fighting corruption, if you're changing the system, then what can happen is that the new system will become equally or even more corrupt. I must say that in the last year, we see some developments which raise hope that things will improve. But this is not enough. You see, we still do not see any practical results of the efforts. We still don't see any consequences of the promises which were made. But we see that there's potential that this will happen. The problem is it is going so extreme. Delay in the implementation of anti-corruption measures can cost this country a lot. Not only that, usually citizens of any country in the world, when they're facing economic and similar problems, they don't care so much about fighting corruption. They look at their governments because they want to see the model. They want to see that the government is really doing something in the fight against corruption. If this does not happen, citizens start to become disappointed. We are not there yet. But if the speed of the reforms in the anti-corruption area will not be increased significantly, you can be sure that disappointment of citizens will be a large one. And this will also have consequences in the area where we are specialized. This is companies. Companies, in order to be able to fight at the global market, they have to apply methods which are corrupt-free. In the law on the prevention of corruption of Ukraine, you have provisions which give a lot of emphasis on companies fighting corruption. And this has to be seen as a complementary activity to what the government is doing. No government in the world can fight corruption by itself. And the legislator in Ukraine has taken care that companies also have the legal basis to do it. And again, of course, this leads us to the question of how this will be implemented. For Ukraine, what is ideal ones that numerous we have that citizens will that corruption is being fought. There's no that is applied And in this, I'm sure that Ukrainian citizens will support its government in many other, even just too. Start.
Зараз of people please waive yourself. To okay.
Well, in order to and the mentality behavior you can rather was you need to create and maintain goes to given as an education training goes to be aware and duty you need following, and that's so where I get so you have as well project cannot government allow everyone project like body has this process of formulating on some is essential. I would start.
Good everybody that we know there is discussion for the we look at country development to become the tax so corrupt to understand by it and 40 will be paid to the arms. See that week is unnecessary loss with public. It's an example very clear for the. If you look down how terrible the country has been, it hampers peace, money to try for and also else around control $1 billion people we know today at percentage, very small stage. It hampers peace. It and that corruption is really when the corrupt infrastructure in France. Really is and to that give some to say positive rest for a person new how the company made of this but trans persons being convicted total ability you.
Thank you, Eva. Наступне until you think about your questions. Віддав for the audience.
I'm coming here for all the many in the work of them with criminals, the bad guy, and their legislators do not meet in the elected. So, unfortunately, it's not long any other. It's also the this clears up the situation. Simply increase the of political parties. We will enter country because if this positive
Ще запитання. Over there.
experience good and something to be failure. And the positive side of this is that Ukraine doesn't have to make this. So the political will that refers to the previous question is the first one. Unless there is political will and equal, without discrimination application of the law, there is no hope for changing anything in society. There has to be genuine political will and uniform application of the law. Then you look at the quality of the law. And one particularity that we see in the Ukraine is that there are very frequent changes, amendments, and laws that leave some uncertainty, and it seems to be responses to particular points rather than a strategic, holistic approach to here's the problem, here's the law, here's the basic normative framework, the basic principles, and here are the details on what everybody needs to do. I think a strategic approach here on what the problems, what the particularities, what's special about the Ukraine, what are the needs, what is the capacity, and how we follow from that to actually build something that is consistent and coherent without too frequent changes that confuses not only the private sector, but everyone, I think is a step forward. So a strategic approach is what is needed.
And Drago wants to add something.
Well, you ask if they're close to optimum. They're not. They're just a good start. But so many things can be improved, so many things can be enhanced. And I can tell you, I know the Ukrainian anti-corruption experts, but what the legislation which is coming out is sometimes really surprising, if I use a very polite term. I'm quite sure that some of the mistakes, loopholes and flaws in the laws are not accidental, because I cannot find any reasonable explanation for some of the solutions which do the legislation. It is not, say, absent of knowledge, it is not absence of international standards or international practice, it is simply that somebody does not want them being functional.
Дякую. Я прошу Олександра Вінникова дати український аспект.
Thank you. I'd like to present a European viewpoint on that. Good afternoon. I would still like to come back to the previous question, but just try to be short. Okay. I should start it with myself, because even in Brazil Parliament, they also have problems with taking someone's cards to vote, skipping sessions when Central Election Commission has to deregister candidates during next coming elections. Speaking of poor performance of our legislation, we need to be mindful of the fact that new legislation has been postponed for half a year to allow for certain organization matter to be resolved, but eventually it is only now that we are resolving organization matters with assistance from the civic society, from international donor community, and it is still early to evaluate them. But if we are speaking about performance appraisal, we should probably look at our neighboring post-socialist countries about how they hold their monitoring of cases, corruption cases, the number of court verdicts pronounced in these cases. This will provide a quite interesting picture, because even the small country of Estonia, that is barely bigger than half of Kiev, has more such cases than, for example, in Romania or Hungary. And we will need to wait for specific numbers to evaluate how these laws perform. That evaluation of anti-corruption legislation, the recommendations on establishing an anti-corruption model to reduce corruption risks, also through legislative instruments, as well as analysis of governmental mechanism of anti-corruption program implementation and of relevant reports and recommendations to improve the performance of anti-corruption activities is among the scopes of activity of this group.
Persons and something about harassment. My question has to do with employees in Ukraine. So what can employees in Ukraine realistically do if they are pushed or harassed out of jobs for unethical reasons, and then a new and unqualified person steps into the position? As you know, many Ukrainians don't trust laws, they don't trust legislators, they're unwilling to speak up or fight for their rights. What should they do?
Thank you.
What would you recommend?
The example I talked was harassment against a whistleblower that denounced the criminal behavior of this bank. And the consular whistleblower protection for all member states, this is weak protection. In Ukraine, you don't have this protection yet. So this has to come. This is among the laws that should be promoted to protect the whistleblowers in private companies, but also in the public sector. That is paramount to get wrongdoing, to get corruption shown, because corruption can only be seen from inside or discovered from inside. So if you don't have a whistleblower protection, the person who will go to the press or to the police with the information is in a very risky situation, and we will have less information. So, you know, there are some very fundamental laws in democracies. Access to information, and it is whistleblower protection. We are struggling with whistleblower protection in many countries because the multinationals don't like whistleblower protection. They like to be able to keep the harm of their products secret for a long time. So this is also for civil society to work on, to require. It is in the public interest. And then when you have this protection, harassment could be lowered. And everybody sees the importance of the responsibility of the legal persons, because they can pay. If you only have the responsibility of physical persons, you are not sure to get the damage.
Thank you. And Nikos Passas has something to add.
Yeah, a couple of immediate steps that can be taken directly with respect to the problem you posed is that there has to be a mechanism or a tool where the employee who falls victim to this practice can actually report and complain this to an ombuds office or one of the anti-corruption agencies that are being created in the Ukraine right now. Secondly, to have a mechanism for publicly reporting how many such complaints have been made without identifiers at the beginning, and what the authority has done about it. And three, what was the final outcome of this? Has corrective action been taken? And that creates a way of monitoring what malpractices we have and what is the Ukrainian government doing about them.
Thank you. Ваше запитання.
Віталій Тарасов, канал Україна. В мене два.
Vitaly Tarasov, Ukraine channel. First question to Mr. Nikos. You said that the fight against corruption should start at all levels, including the level of schools, educational sphere, etc. Do you see what spheres are of most importance here in Ukraine? And my second question is to Ms. Yeva concerning our previous government. We all knew it was corrupt. It was profiteering from the state, from the Ukrainian people. How do you think, what Ukraine's first-hand measures should be, first step should be to revert this and to punish those culprits?
Drago? No? Okay, Nikos, you answer the first question, and then Eva answers the one addressed to her.
There is no particular sphere where schools will have to start. I mean, what is about values. What we're talking about is what is the right thing to do given circumstances. In many parts of the world, we have the assumption that corruption is, or as we understand it, international standards and law. Corruption is the exception. But sometimes we find that corruption is the rule and the widespread practice. That is where mentality change is actually necessary. That is where you have to engage people from the young age on particular scenarios. Here is what you face, what is the right thing to do here, and why? And how can you do that without getting in trouble? Okay, so that is where you start with the very fundamental primary school things, but then as you move up the educational scale, it becomes much more sophisticated and can be sector specific. But that depends on what Ukrainian problems are, what Ukrainian challenges are, and that is where a diagnostic is the first step that needs to be done. What's the Ukrainian problem? Why is it a problem? How big a problem is it? Where are the priorities? Where do we start? And that is what you integrate in the educational initiative. So the educational initiative is not independent and on its own.
Could you conceivably name some priority areas for Ukraine to start the fight against corruption in? Because working with schools, it is about far perspective. I think Alexander Vinnikov has something to add here, and then Drago. Одна з проблем, як, скажімо, віддати посаду більш кваліфікованій людині, забувши своїх родичів. Як поступитися питаннями лояльності, дружби, таке інше, на користь кращого, більш фахового працівника?
There's a different way of resolving it. Work it out.
Thank you. Alexander.
Проект
The project of Confident Business deals mostly with the business issues, those of SMEs particularly, and problems of these areas is that corruption appears during checks and inspections. It is no longer a secret that the bodies most involved in checks and inspections have the strongest corruption risks. Actually, in this very room, we presented results of our survey we held all over Ukraine on that. Fiscal authorities take the absolute lead in this corrupt roster. The second honorable place belongs to the judicial system.
Well, answer to your question is basically a very simple one, but it is so difficult to make it happen. You see, in post-socialist countries, people are still used what has been developed through decades, and this is that the only power which exists is the state power. So the state has to prove that it has serious intent to fight corruption, and how this can be done through investigation, prosecution, and adjudication. So as long as people do not see that law is being against, let's say, guys who are corrupt, that everybody knows they are corrupt, to the criminals for whom everybody knows they're criminals, and as long the assets they have gained through their corruption offenses is not being seized and confiscated, as long everything is important. People have to see that the law is being applied. And then we can speak about mentality. You know, mentality takes years, decades. And it is important because if we will change mentality, then we will change the situation at the end. But in order to give people the trust which they need to start changing their mentality, we have to do some other things first. Or we can do it in parallel, but it has to be done. Nobody will believe in anything.
Thank you, Eva.
Yes, and to answer your question as to your former government and public officials, it's exactly the same thing. You need investigations, and for that, investigative journalism is very important. You can make a reportage on the assets that the former minister or the former head of unit has as a starting point for an investigation. You need a starting point for an investigation. You do not investigate everybody. So investigative journalism is a starting point. Or complaint from citizens. And then it is for the investigative body, for the prosecutors to take action quickly. And this is not necessarily very long, and then to freeze the assets. The criminals should be deprived totally, should be stripped of the stolen money. Much of this money is abroad, so you need judicial cooperation. That can only be made by your institutions, the prosecutors and the judges. And this cooperation is now well working because we have made huge progress on the convention side and on the legal side. We have instruments now that are general exchange of information and obligation to help. So it's much better now than it used to be 20 years ago. So there is no reason for impunity but lack of political will and maybe lack of independence of the investigative authority. If the prosecutor, if the head of the prosecutor has loyalties to certain camps in the society, it is important that he is changed. To create confidence, you need to have confidence in the independence of the judiciary. And if that makes you laugh, there is a real serious problem, and that is probably the absolutely first reform that you should require from the present government.
Thank you very much. Колеги, у нас час добігає кінця.
Thank you, colleagues. We are running out of our time. I'd like to ask TV and radio people, do you need individual interviews? No. If not, then we continue work with the audience and we take two questions, first from you, then from you.
Скажіть, будь ласка, хто ставить запитання?
What do you think about the fact that foreign experts directly help in the fight against corruption? For example, to lead a central authority to combat corruption, as some ministers or...
Thank you very much. And the question from the gentleman in the second row. You.
Rostislav Lukac, Rotary.
Rostislav Lubic, Rotary Club, Kyiv Center. I have a question regarding that the Ukrainian people has been robbed for many years because of corruption, and we were flushed of billions of money, and this money went away somewhere to the moon or to Mars maybe. Effectively, they were invested in European banks and companies as well. So my question is, does your report contain any recommendations as to the reverse side of corruption? I'm not going to name these respected banks, but we know of banks that have adopted this money without checking their origin. And even if they knew their origin from Azarov, Akhmetov,
other places. There are very many of them, about 70 in the world. And this is a fight that we are a certain number of persons in the world that has combated, I think, for more than 20 years now. And in Europe, we see progress because it has taken such an importance that it is a political problem even for developed countries. It used to be a problem only for developing countries, but today also developed countries, US, France, Germany, are stripped of their tax revenues by the use of tax havens of rich people, and our multinationals company that do not hide but use a mechanism not to pay taxes, especially in Greece. So this is a very serious problem. The banks get away with it. If they take deposit knowing that it comes from a politically exposed person, they have the obligation to make a signalement, to say that this is a transaction. But we know from experience that they do not do so. Money laundering is business. They earn a lot of money with that. But they can be convicted as accomplice if they do not respect the rules. When they are taken, they are accomplice, and they face closing down of the bank. Even with the law that you have, if they are taken for money laundering and corruption, they can be closed down. I think a lot of banks, many banks, has been quite close to that. It's very dramatic. I'm thinking of HSBC, for instance, taking for money laundering in Mexico of drug trafficking, and I didn't even pretend that I didn't know. And they are under investigation now for tax fraud in France, and we don't know the result, what will come out of it. So we have rules since '89 made by the FATF, know your customer. The bank should not accept deposit coming from PEPs, politically exposed persons, without explanations. But the sad thing is, as long as we haven't seen the banksters behind bars, they will probably continue.
Thank you. Nikos will add on the second question, and then Drago will answer the first one.
It's actually combined because it's related. When it comes to anti-corruption, for the last at least 2 decades, we have a lot of experience and wisdom on what to do, what not to do. And it would be a pity, not for Ukrainian, not to take advantage of that wisdom. So foreign advisors would be very helpful. But the anti-corruption fight must be fought by Ukrainians themselves. So that is the division of labor that I would see as proper. One kind of assistance that foreigners can also provide is whatever mentioned, and that is anti-corruption is not just a Ukrainian affair, it is an international affair. Money goes away, money goes elsewhere. There is responsibility of corporations, lawyers, accountants, whole jurisdictions that are not doing their job, their due diligence. There is wisdom, there is experience with finding out about these things, exposing these things, analyzing, and finding some answers. At least some reintegrative shaming about things that are not being done overseas with this. The public-private relations, another area that Ukraine needs to work out more clearly. What is the proper interaction between the public and the private sector? How openly and fairly these interactions can be done? How these conflicts of interest can be resolved? And there is wisdom here so that traps get avoided. And I hope that you will be able to take advantage of those.
Drago.
Very short to your question. You see, those banks will not bring the money back by themselves. Never. Authorities of their countries will not do anything to make them bring the money back if they will not be asked by Ukrainian authorities to do something. So what we have to do is we have to start some efforts on that, and then there will still be problems. And if the problems will, let's say, be to such an extent, then some other international organizations can get involved. But nothing will happen by itself. So somebody has to push. And I saw so many, let's say, similar situations where everybody was expecting, okay, everybody knows this is dirty money, they will give us the money back. This doesn't happen. You see, somebody will have to work hard to get it back.
Дякую. Останнє запитання з аудиторії, тому що я...
Thank you. The last question from the because I want to reserve the last one from myself to comment, initial comments of the Drago. I have a question to Ms. Yeva. Ms. Yeva, your jewels, you have the good and you, but I think for a public official it might be quite a challenge to earn for these jewels. How were you able to earn these jewels or money for them?
This is gift from my mother-in-law when she died. She gave, or I got it when she died, and I think I am the third or fourth generation of. My husband was a doctor. My family-in-law were well situated. They were what you would call overclass, probably in France, and that is part of my life story. And it's nothing shame in that, and I hope that my daughter or my daughter-in-law, after my death, will wear them.
Я дуже сподіваюся на те, що
I hope that my colleagues will be able to put the same questions, the same sharp questions, and such up-close and personal ones also to Ukrainian officials when and if they have such possibility. It will surely make a huge contribution from our Guild of Journalists to the fight against corruption in Ukraine. But I still have a question to Mr. Nikos. He said that probably there is not a single with that many anti-corruption authorities as Ukraine. I would like to ask this. How would you estimate the risk that this fight against corruption in Ukraine will turn into a business in itself and will only contribute to the spread of corruption in the country?
From two different perspectives. First, the international one. And you ask, this is already business from international perspective. Of course, we have some, let's say, international organizations of foreign countries which are really trying to assist Ukraine in fighting corruption. And this is fine. But you have, let's say, some international experts which are just traveling from one country to another country, selling the knowledge they have, taking no responsibilities, earning the money and leaving. So, yes, you're right. This has to be prevented at any price. From the national point of view, I don't think we can speak about the anti-corruption industry because the situation is much too serious for Ukraine. What I see here, although the high number of anti-corruption institutions is basically a consequence of two things. First, highly organized, or better to say, not coordinated recommendations from different international organizations. And second, the willingness of Ukraine or the wish of Ukraine to fulfill those recommendations. And since there was no coordination, and we see that some of the are in place from not the previous government, but from the one before. So at the end of the day, somebody will have to draw the line and say, we need this and this and this one. We don't need the rest because everything is covered. But right now, I think we would cause some damage if you start stopping some of them. Let's get to the functioning two most important ones. Those will be the Bureau and the National Anti-Corruption Agency, and what we can do to start eliminating some of the rest.
Thank you. We're almost through with the time lot. Yet still to remind you who was with us today, I'd like to give the possibility of 30 seconds speech to our participants to say what they still have to say. Alexander Vinik, your 30 seconds. Coming back to the business topic, I'd like to remind you that all the companies involved in public procurement with a threshold of 1 million hryvnias or more will need to have anti-corruption programs approved by the national agency, and they will be subject to checks also by the media. Also, there was an information run today that the National Bank of Ukraine has announced a an opening to the position of the head of anti-corruption programs in the bank. It will be a nice chance to see how transparent these programs are. Thank you, Alexander. Your time is over. Nikos Passas, professor from the Boston University.
Business, I don't see any problem with having good incentives for effective anti-corruption. As long as there is openness, high quality, effectiveness, and accountability, making anti-corruption a business would be actually a good thing.
Thank you very much. And Eva Jolie, вона колишня слідча суддя і депутат.
Now the floor is given to Eva Jolie. Your 30 seconds.
Well, I only have one advice to the Ukrainian people. That is the importance of the civil society. Nothing will happen unless you require it and that you put pressure upon your politicians. You must organize yourself in association, be active, support independent journalists, and with vivid civil society and independent press, Ukraine can move forward.
Merci bien. Drago, керівник експертної групи.
And head of the OECD's work group to combat bribery, Drago.
Push government to start seriously fighting corruption, but you can do even more if you will start doing it by yourself. And now I'm saying this, I mean, in your journal, in your newspapers, in your TVs, in your radios, but also engaging in the private sector, in civil society. It is not the government who should do it alone.
Дуже дякую. Нагадаю, що
Thank you all so much. May I remind you that the press conference on the fight against corruption in Ukraine, the price of delays, this provided us with an insight about the work done with support from the OECD. Thank you for your attention and with good wishes.